Hello, good evening everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes. Just about. Marvellous. Okay. Yeah, that's the title of my talk. It's a bit enigmatic, isn't it? And I suppose it falls into that eclectic zone that Tim was talking about earlier. The country I'm going to talk to you about this evening is Luxembourg, and I imagine up until very recently, all anyone ever really knew about Luxembourg was that it had lots of tax evaders based there, as in Amazon, eBay, Facebook, Google. They're all based in Luxembourg, which means they have a brass plaque somewhere along Banker Street, and their tax haven status is absolutely secure that way. The only other thing that most people know about it is that it's somewhere that you drive through to get to other places. So whenever I mentioned Luxembourg previously, people would say, oh yeah, we drove through there to get to France. It's really small, isn't it? We were on our way to Italy, and we saw one sign saying welcome to Luxembourg, and then there's one saying thank you for visiting Luxembourg. So that's what most people have known about Luxembourg anyway. And then, of course, I agreed to do the talk, set up the title, and we have Rangers being knocked out of the Europa League by Progrès Niederkorn, which is literally a 1.5 horse village in the middle of Luxembourg. They couldn't believe their luck. A lot of the expats who lived in Luxembourg actually went along to that game, and not many of us were very sorry for Rangers. Sorry if there are any Ranger fans in the audience, but it was quite a night in Luxembourg, and there were a lot of very happy people. We then also had Gilles Muller knocking Rafa Nadal out of Wimbledon. So there you go. This little known place is all over all the headlines, so I'm thinking, oh great. Didn't want to change the title though, so you're stuck with it. So Luxembourg, it's a divided country, and that's geographically, culturally, linguistically, all sorts of ways. It's a tiny place, but it still manages within that tininess to be really quite divided. The next picture is quite a graphic shot of what I mean about the two bits of Luxembourg. Underneath there you've got the casemates. And the casemates are the ancient fortifications in Old Luxembourg town. They're amazing to go through, and if you're there in the summer, they're really cool as well. So it's really nice to get in there and get out of 33 degrees heat. And up there you've got quite an early version of what's known as the Kirchberg, which is where a lot of the banks and European institutions and the Court of Justice and the European Parliament and all those other lovely officey type things happen. As I say, that's probably about maybe 4 or 5 years old, that footage. The skyline now is pretty much solid glass, steel and horribleness up there. You can see the cranes there as they were building it. So that's, Luxembourg town centre in essence is ancient and ridiculously modern and pretty horrible looking. This here is another example of it. That in the valley is what used to be a lovely secluded little village. Classic church. It's got a castle further down there. You're not a village in Luxembourg if you haven't got your own church and your own castle. Forget it. They all come equipped. So that's a tiny little village, and Luxembourg town centre is up that way. The Kirchberg is that way, and the Red Bridge is a bit of a monstrosity that was built to try and link the town centre to there. So you didn't have to drive down up through the village and then up this really steep sheer cliff, which in the winter was really quite dangerous. And this is another lovely bridge in Luxembourg. Again, big valley, valleys everywhere, trees everywhere. This is the old town bridge leading down towards the station at that end. And the lovely buildings you can see there were the Arbed headquarters from when they used to have a steel industry. Like most countries, the industries went for a burden at the end of the 70s, and it's now mainly financial services, European institutions, and local Luxembourgish industries and initiatives, but they're all quite small. This is a newer shot of the Red Bridge, and you'll notice there's a difference. It now has this heightened side to it. The reason for that was there were loads of bankers and other people leaping off the Red Bridge to commit suicide and falling into the back gardens of the people living in the village below. So they thought this was a bit mucky, because the poor people coming out in the morning were finding, oh, go to the bin, no, sorry, can't get there, there's a mashed body. So they decided, rather than make the bankers happy, let's just build a parapet and make them go somewhere else to kill themselves. I think that's quite cute. Very Luxembourg thinking. That's another shot of the Kirchberg. Again, that's probably not as recent as some, because I think in between the twin towers, if I can call them that, and that tower there, there's now a whole heap of other stuff you can't actually see over into the rest of the valley there. But that gives you an idea of the impact that the institutions and the banks have had in Luxembourg in a really quite short space of time. I do have some notes, thank you, Tim. And I'll give you some figures which I thought were quite amazing, actually. The population of Luxembourg is 590,000, and of that, 48% are actually foreign-born nationals. In Luxembourg city centre, so the other side of the Red Bridge from there, it goes up to 70%. Now, that's pretty stunning. We compare that to East Sussex rather than Wales. I get bored of people comparing things to Wales. In East Sussex, you've got 548,000 of us, and only 9% of those are non-white British. So, you know, similar sized populations, vastly different number of immigrants and foreign-born nationals living there. The other fun fact about Luxembourg is that it only has 6 motorways, and their total length is 161 kilometres. The first one was built in 1969, and the way that they decided to do it, they did a tiny little bit of motorway and said, look, we've got a motorway now, we're fine. And they only actually reached the first border with their motorway in 1980. So they're very proud now that the country is sort of, you know, bisected both ways by motorways, and we think we're really, really fancy and snazzy. About 30 minutes drive from all that horrendous metal and glass, you get to the Moselle Valley, and this is the turn of the river in the Moselle Valley. It's very famous in Luxembourg. It's a beauty spot that a lot of people go to visit. You can see there's a lot of vineyards in the middle of it, and one of the most popular things that Luxembourgers do is make a lot of wine. You can get Rivaner and Riesling from Luxembourg. They specialise in white wine. And it's very, very cheap. There are some, you know, sort of top-end ones that may cost about £3 to £4 a bottle. The cheaper stuff, which the locals drink, is about the equivalent of £2 a bottle. Some of it is gut rot and some of it is quite okay. But yeah, it's very popular. They also do their own beers as well. There's a Mosel beer and a Bofferding beer. They drink a lot. It's riddled with castles, Luxembourg. As I mentioned earlier, you know, each village has a church, a castle. This is a beautiful one, I think, in Echternach. That's the Castle, the Beaufort Castle. It's quite near the town. It's on a hill. They're hills and valleys, yeah. All the castles are built on hills, and that's the one in Echternach, which is one of the larger towns in the north of the country. This is Vianden, which I always think looks a bit like a Walt Disney one. Vianden is a smaller town. It's not that big, and it's a very popular tourist destination. It has a funicular railway going up the side to get to the castle, which again is on a big hill in the middle. The claim to fame of Vianden is that it's where most of the Dutch tourists go, because there are quite a few campsites around, and the Dutch tend to always come with their caravans. They're not very popular in Luxembourg, because Luxembourg roads aren't built for caravans apart from these 2 big motorways, and they're very windy, windy, and caravans get stuck and slew across the roads, and they create huge problems. And also the Luxembourgers have noticed that the Dutch don't spend an awful lot of money. So this is another lovely castle. This is in a tiny village called Burglinster. As you can see just around there, there's the sort of little houses, there's a butcher's, 2 cafes, and this dirty great castle in the middle. And the castle has a very posh restaurant in the lower bit, which is a real degustation restaurant. A 7-course meal would cost you about £250. And in the upper bit there's a little brasserie, which is more of a normal locals restaurant, where the people who live in Burglinster eat really regularly, very well attended, and it's just a gorgeous spot, really. Castles. It has its own language, Luxembourgish. Luxembourgish is culturally very important to the local Luxembourgers. It only actually produced its own dictionary between the years of 74 to 82, and that was partly because they just wanted to keep it for themselves. It was something that they didn't really want to share with other people, and also partly because there wasn't really a need for it to be known by other people than the Luxembourgers, and they taught it to each other as they grew up. As the country's expanded and foreigners have come in, and some foreigners have the good grace to be interested and want to learn Luxembourgish, they thought, we'll do a dictionary. So the language of Luxembourgish, it's a bit of a mixture of French, German and Dutch. It's a bit spitty, a bit guttural, it's not very pretty. If you wanted to ask somebody, do you speak Luxembourgish? Nah, don't be silly. It would be Sprecht de Luxembourgish, nee, was de Gakkush. So it's up and down, spitty. It's not very pretty at all, but it's theirs. And they have a royal family too. And as is the way with all royal families, they're real lookers. There you go. That's the Grand Duke sitting down there, and the two sons. I think he stepped down not so long ago. He's the current Grand Duke standing up there on the right-hand side. But they're really popular. The Luxembourgers love them to pieces. And this is despite during the war the royal family decamping for the duration of the Second World War and then just sort of coming back in afterwards like, oh, nobody noticed. The other thing that Luxembourgish is really useful for, and they're mentioning their culture, was that during the war, when they were supposedly a neutral territory, but they'd actually been occupied by the Germans from 1940 onwards. The Germans in 1941 did this questionnaire, and they made it really clear to all the Luxembourgers that the right answers to the three questions they were being asked was German, German, and German. And famously, the Luxembourgers, in answer to the question, what's your culture? And then the question, what's your language? And then the question, what's your nationality? Went Luxembourgish, 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 95% of the population. So although there wasn't a massive active resistance, there was a huge passive resistance, and they held their ground. And that's another reason why the language is very precious to them, because it enabled them to get through the occupation and keep their own identity, despite the Germans imposing German as a language in the school and making them say Heil Hitler instead of hello, etc. So that's part of the Luxembourg royal family. The next shot is Princess Mary Astrid. You probably won't have heard of her either, but in the early 80s, some of you may remember there was talk about Prince Charles, before he married Lady Di, being married off to this lady as a suitable, fellow European royal. I think there's quite a similarity there to the Princess Diana look. It may be found as type. But they certainly dated for a little while. There were all sorts of rumours, and then it just all got very hushed up, so nothing came of it. The European school. This is the second thing I never thought I'd be eulogising this evening. Luxembourg's great. Two wonderful European schools. The European school is a phenomena that I don't think many people here have heard of, despite the fact you've got one in Culham in Oxfordshire, quite near Abingdon. They were set up in the 50s, initially for the people working for the coal and steel trade, and then Jean Monnet, who's the founding father of the European Union, decided it was a really good idea, and he adopted it as part of the European project of bringing all the countries together, understanding each other's cultures, understanding each other's languages, in an effort to make Europe a more cohesive entity and avoid wars, obviously, because it wasn't that long since the Second World War had finished. So this is one of the, it didn't come out too well, did it? That's a European baccalaureate certificate. It just shows you the topics that you need to do to get your European baccalaureate. You have to pass all these topics. It isn't like A-levels where you can pick and choose one or two. So you had your mother tongue, Latin philosophy. I'm going to have to take this, I can't read it for anything. Here we go. That's better. Latin philosophy, first foreign language, second foreign language, history, geography, maths, biology, physical education, and the optional subject was history of art. Now, this was actually mine, so please don't look at the marks because I wasn't a very good student. But those topics down there, of those, I had to do history, geography, and my history of art through my first foreign language, French, and mother tongue just for the others. You also had to do a written and an oral in everything. And I vividly remember having to do genetics for my biology oral and being, but yeah, you need to pass all those to get a baccalaureate. So it's a really good rounded education. And the other thing that it provides is by having to do subjects through your first foreign language, the classes you do those in, you're mixing with people who are German, Italian, Spanish, Danish, you name it, all the different nationalities that attend the school. You get mixed up in your mother tongue, in your non-mother tongue subjects to really good effect. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, let's put it that way. I certainly hated Latin. But looking back on it now, it was a brilliant education, certainly compared to what I might have got if I'd stayed where I was, more of which later. European schools. Brian Molko of Placebo went to the European School in Luxembourg. He didn't stay very long because he got bullied, so he went on to the International American School in Luxembourg, but he certainly did 2 or 3 years there. So that's somebody who you might think, well, yeah, he's possibly a product of the European system. Quite a sort of a trans-everything type person. This gentleman is the product of the European School in Brussels, you may be surprised to hear. He spent 3 years there before going on to, where was it he went on to? Eton eventually, but it was via another posh English school somewhere. Yeah, he met his wife Marina Wheeler at the European School in Brussels, so you really should know better, but there you go. The fifth fact that you don't know yet about Luxembourg is that it is a really puzzled country politically. I've mentioned the churches and the castles and the local Luxembourgers and then the influx of all these foreigners. I mean, as well as the foreigners who actually live in Luxembourg City and the country, every day, every working day, 175,000 people from Belgium, Germany and France cross the border to work there and then go home again. So it's really diverse, and it's become diverse really quickly. And that means that this deeply Catholic, deeply conservative country has ended up scratching its head a little bit, because since 2013, this guy, Xavier Bettel, who's another product of the European schools, by the way, has been their Prime Minister. He's succeeded to Jean-Claude Juncker, another name that's vaguely familiar to some people. And he's a Democrat. That's a sort of right-wing party, but they're very liberal as far as outlook goes. They're conservative financially, but in every other way they're really quite liberal. And he's not only a Democrat, but he's in a coalition with the Greens and the Socialists. So you can imagine some of the older Luxembourgers going, how do we get to this? And to cap it all, deeply conservative Catholic country, he married his long-term partner about 2 years ago when it became legal in Luxembourg. And the younger Luxembourgers think this is brilliant because they're giving a really modern, fresh look to Luxembourg. We're getting away from the old castles and Catholic, bells and whistles stuff that goes on normally in the villages. And it's really shaken Luxembourg up in a way that you couldn't imagine, having these two leading their government. So, having started off thinking, well, this is such a different country to England, isn't it? Divided country, royals, confused politics. We're back where we started here, aren't we? I think it's somewhere, if you haven't visited, I hope that me chatting away to you this evening might persuade you, if you are over that way, to actually maybe stop off and at least have a coffee rather than just get to the next bit and Wood Way. I find it a fascinating place to go and visit. And just to explain why I'm up here yakking on about Luxembourg to you with the strange accent that I've got, which some of you may be placing and some of you may not. This is where I moved from to move to Luxembourg. I was doing an online search to try and find pictures of Belfast in '73, and I was trying to get away from the political ones because it was all soldiers on barricades, soldiers on checkpoints, Molotov cocktails. This is one of the ones from '73 that didn't look quite so bad. But yeah, this is Belfast. This was the town I grew up in until the age of 10. And it was a very repressed society. Even as a 10-year-old, I knew that you kept your head down. You certainly didn't show what school badge you had on your uniform. You scuttled home. You didn't go out anywhere in the evenings. And lots of things weren't talked about. So I went from that to this. This is the Grand Rue in Luxembourg. This is the main shopping thoroughfare. It's their version, probably not Oxford Street. It doesn't really have an Oxford Street. It's probably more like Bond Street. It is very exclusive, very rich, very expensive. All the shops are sort of designery things and lots of fur coats and gold teeth and that sort of thing. So those are the two contrasts. To bring it even a little bit more personally back to me, I went from that, which was the Convent of Mercy Primary School on the Crumlin Road, to that, which was the European school photo of the second year I was at school there. And just looking at this photo, we've got Danish, Swedish, Dutch, Canadian, English, Danish, Irish, American, half Danish, half Greek, half German, half South African, half Danish, half Italian, Irish, pure Danish, and a couple of English at the back. And that was the English mother tongue lesson group that I was in at the European school. I'd never have found that diversity of friends ever if I'd stayed behind in Belfast, not in a million years. And again, that's another reason I'm deeply grateful for having actually gone to Luxembourg at the time I did, because I'm still in contact with a lot of those people. We kept a friendship group. We're scattered to the four winds all over the world doing massively different things. And it was actually, again, looking back, really good times. At the time that photo was taken, I was thinking, oh God, double Latin next. I haven't done my declensions. Oh. But yeah, good times. I took out photos and I thought, I've got to put this up. Only in Belfast would you have your first Holy Communion photo taken on a filthy, dirty chair that even in black and white you can see the stains on, in your little white dress, Bride of Christ. And it stank, I remember it still, it stank to high heaven, that place. And that was professional photographers in Belfast. So I went from that to that, which is a slightly hungover 15 or 16-year-old me on a school trip. Again, experiencing lots of travel, lots of different cultures. Wouldn't have had that in Belfast either. So that's why I'm up here talking to you this evening about somewhere that I didn't like at the time, about a schooling that I hated at the time, but in retrospect, I think both are pretty damn fine. And this is another reason I'm here this evening. The guy on the right there is my dad, Leonard Sudway, and it was he who, in '73, saw that the UK had joined the European community and thought, right, that's our boat out of China. And he got a job as a translator in the European Commission. He and Erica, that's my lovely German stepmother there, have been living in the village of Burglinster. Think back to the third castle. That's the entrance to the castle from another angle. They've been living there for over 20 years, and he's got the supreme accolade of actually being accepted by the local Luxembourgish community in Burglinster. They don't do that very often. It's because he took the trouble to learn the language. They're part of the Skittles team. They do all sorts of weird stuff, like, they have geranium competitions. He keeps winning geranium competitions. So yeah, he's very ensconced there, and very happy man, and it's really thanks to him and his courage and his talent that I'm here this evening as a relatively well brung up person able to talk on about Luxembourg. So a little bit of Luxembourgish to end with. Merci voor luisteren. Thank you for listening.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne. I must go and visit there now. In fact, I must go and visit, see your dad, and get him to come and do a talk about geraniums. I think that's that would be the thing. So, just before we have a break and have some drinks, does anybody have some questions for Anne in terms of what you've heard about Lux? I knew nothing. I had no. Yes, over here. Yeah.
National dish, it's probably wild boar and sauerkraut. Yeah, if you have a village get-together, quite often they'll just kill a wild boar and the village square will be taken over with a big roast spit thing, and everybody comes along with slices of huge chunks of boar, and the sauerkraut that's part of the Germanic influence coming in, yeah.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, just in case people didn't hear there, the one thing I didn't mention, which some people, slightly older than me, but not that much, would know is Radio Luxembourg. I was trying to keep it relatively short, but that is obviously a cultural touchstone. I knew Tony Prince and Dave Christian, I don't know if you remember, they used to moonlight at a local discotheque called Le Blow Up, which I used to go to underage. So they were part of the furniture there. I didn't realise it was as big in England until I came back over here, and everybody's Radio Luxembourg. But they were just part of the furniture, and they were regular DJs at the Blow Up. Tony Prince was lovely. Dave Christian, slightly slimy.
Brilliant. Yeah, I remember Radio Luxembourg as well. Actually, great. Anybody else got any more questions for Anne before we round up and head to the bar for some drinks? So, okay, fine. We've got sort of probably 15 minutes, and we'll dash to the bar, get a drink, and then we'll come back for the next talk. Thank you very much.